Good morning, everybody. It is Miss Bishop, or good afternoon if you're doing your notes in the afternoon, depending on when you're doing them. So we're just going to keep moving forward with our equations note. So if you remember, up until this point, we have been learning about one-step equations. So now we're going to move on into our two-step equations notes. And to do and solve two-step equations, it's going to be the exact same process that we use for one-step equations. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you'll want to use the inverse operation. You'll want to use your inverse operation. And now remember, inverse is just a really fancy way of saying opposite. Okay, so we're going to use the inverse operation to isolate the term that includes our variable. Okay, isolate the term that includes our variable, and you'll see the difference. If you look right below, right down here, you'll see the difference in between a one-step example and a two-step example, and hopefully you'll see what I mean by isolate the term that includes the variable. So this time the variable is not going to be totally by itself. It's actually going to sometimes be attached to something else. So after we use the inverse operation to isolate the variable, we'll then use the inverse operation again to completely isolate the variable. Oops, a little sloppy. I'll try to make that better for you guys. To isolate the variable. Okay. So once we get our term isolated with the variable, then we just want to completely isolate the variable. Make sure that we get it all by itself. And then you'll check your answer by substituting your answer back into the equation. So check your answer by substituting your answer back into the equation. All right, so let's look down here at our one-step versus two-step equations. So up until this point, what we've been dealing with is why our variable has been totally by itself, but it's been, something's always been in the way, whether that's like a +5 or a -10 or a divided by 2 or a multiplied by 12. You know, there was always something in its way. But the variable itself kind of was already by itself, if that makes sense. So for one-step examples, remember we want to try to get our y by itself. In order to do that, we have to do the opposite of +5, which is -5. And then you end up with y equals 6. Don't know why I put double equal signs. So when you do 11 minus 5, you get 6, and that's your final answer. Well, in a two-step example, just like it sounds, now we have two steps. Before we only had one step, we had to -5. Now we're going to have two steps. So the first step says to use the inverse operation to isolate the variable with the term with the variable. So find your variable and then circle the whole term. Okay, you want to circle the whole term with the variable. All right. After that, you want to go ahead and get rid of what's left over. Okay, so right now I have +5 left over, and the opposite of +5 is -5. So I -5 from both sides, and I'm left with 2y equals 6. Okay, once you do that first step, now it's just a plain old, good old-fashioned one-step example, and you know how to do these. So 2y is multiplication, and what's the opposite of multiplication? Very good, that's division. So you divide by 2 both sides, and your answer would wind up being 3. So y equals 3. It's a very ugly looking 3. Sorry, guys. So that's what a two-step example looks like. That's what a two-step equation looks like. Just to go ahead and get you used to it, 9 times out of 10, you're going to either be adding or subtracting first, and then multiplying or dividing. Now that's 9 times out of 10. There are always those exceptions, and hopefully next week when we're back into class, I'll be able to show you what those exceptions look like. All right, let's go down. So my goal is I'm going to do 2 of these examples with you, and then you are going to do questions 3, 4, 5, and 6 on your own. Okay. Now, if you read the instructions on this page, you'll know that afterwards you do have another assignment, and it's a short quiz, but you get to use your notes because the quiz is over questions 3, 4, 5, and 6. So the questions that you have to do on your own, just like you would in class, those are going to be your quiz questions, and you are allowed to use your notes for that. So it should be super easy and super fast for you to get done, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and look at these questions. All right, so our first one is 4y plus 1 equals 13. Now remember, our very first step is we want to isolate the term with our variable. So we find our variable and we're going to circle it. Okay, so 4y is in a bubble. We're not touching 4y at all for the first little bit. Okay, well, what's left over? I have plus 1 left over. Okay, and what's the inverse of plus 1? Very good, minus 1. Okay, so we're going to minus 1 from both sides. And when we do that, we're left with 4y on the left and 12 on the right. 13 minus 1 is 12. From there, it's just a good old-fashioned one-step equation. Okay, 4y is multiplication. And what's the opposite of multiplication? Division. Very good. So you'll divide both sides by 4. And then you're left with y equals 3. Sound good? Okay, so let me just quickly take up some space, and I want to show you what it looks like whenever you are plugging your answer back in, when you're substituting back in to check your work. So again, you start off with your normal equation, 4y plus 1 equals 13. Okay, when you rewrite it, instead of writing y, you're going to write the answer of 3, which is what you guys told me y was. So 4 times 3 plus 1 equals 13. And then you just use order of operations to help you solve that. So 4 times 3 is 12, plus 1 is in fact 13, so we did that right. Okay, so I would pause the video right here for a minute, write that down in your space that you have. Obviously, I had to write a little bit bigger over into my number 2 space, but you do have some space right over here in between your two numbers that you can write this example down for how to check your work. All right, welcome back. So I'm going to go ahead and erase this so I can continue working. All right, so number 2, 6x plus 2 equals 26. So again, we're going to isolate our term with our variable, which is 6x in this case. So I'm going to put that in a bubble. I'm not touching it right now. I'm going to work with what's left over. And what's left over is plus 2. Now what's the inverse operation of plus 2? Very good, it's minus 2. So I'm minus 2 from both sides. I'm left with 6x on the left and 24 on the right. Okay, again, once you get down to this step, it's a good old-fashioned one-step equation. You guys know how to do this. You guys were doing really well with this yesterday. So 6x is multiplication. What's the inverse of that? It's going to be division. Very good. So you divide both sides by 6, and you're left with x equals 4. All right. So that's it for now, guys. Like I said, go ahead and do problems 3, 4, 5, and 6. You do have 2 problems down here at the bottom. These are going to be challenge problems. We haven't really talked about these yet. This is something that we're going to touch on next week. But if you would like to go ahead and challenge yourself and tackle these problems, you're more than welcome to. It's not required, though. All right. All I'm wanting done is 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's the required work. And then remember that the quiz that you have after these notes is over questions 3, 4, 5, and 6. They're the exact same questions. All you're doing is putting in your answers. Okay? Well, I hope you guys have a fabulous day, and I will hopefully see you guys on Monday. Bye.